Hello, and welcome to our webinar on Best Practices for SQL Server 2008 End of Support. My name is Jim Burnham. I'm from 6nines, and along with our partners from Amazon Web Services and Movere, we thank you for your time and interest, and we're glad you're here and hope you find the information we present today to be useful. Next slide. As you're probably aware, Microsoft support for SQL Server 2008 ends in July 2019. Most organizations need to respond to this event, and we're suggesting today one of the best practices to do here is to take it as an opportunity for cost optimization and application modernization. However, to do that, there's three critical tasks that your organization will need to follow. First, you'll need to understand Microsoft licensing in the cloud and how cloud optimization affects your costs. Secondly, you're going to need to know where every single instance of Microsoft SQL Server is. And once you locate it, secondly, you need to know where every instance of Microsoft SQL Server is and the hardware resources that it consumes. And then finally, you'll need to develop a plan that can save your money while you replatform, modernize, or retire your SQL applications. Today, we have three experts who will contribute their experience and knowledge to this topic. First, you'll hear from Lance Spratt, a Microsoft licensing and optimization lead from Amazon Web Services. Lance is an expert on the intersection of Microsoft licensing and cloud deployments, and it's a great resource for what you can and can't do in the cloud with your licenses. Secondly, you'll hear from Andrew Ireland. Andrew is Chief Evangelist at Movere. One of the biggest problems that enterprise face is finding all their SQL Server 2008 instances. Andrew will talk to how Movere can quickly uncover your SQL applications and not only provide you with an inventory, but also uncover application dependencies. And then finally, Eric Terrell, Managing Director from 6nines, will review options available for managing your SQL Server 2008 applications. 6nines is an Amazon Premier partner and an expert in Microsoft workloads and AWS. At the very end, I'll jump back on and we'll talk about a complimentary assessment with Movere and 6nines to help you develop your very own SQL Server 2008 migration plan. So now I'll turn the presentation over to Lance Spratt. Take it away, Lance.
Thank you, Jim. My name is Lance Spratt, and I am the Microsoft Licensing and Optimization Sales Lead at AWS. I've been at AWS for about 2.5 years. Prior to joining AWS, I was at Microsoft for about 11 years on the cloud and hosting team in various roles, including sales, licensing compliance, and the management of the US resellers. In my role at AWS, I help both customers and partners determine the most cost-effective licensing strategies when moving Microsoft workloads to the cloud. Here at AWS, we're celebrating an exciting milestone. We're celebrating 10 years of running Windows Server on EC2. Over the past 10 years, AWS has grown a large base of customers running mission-critical Microsoft applications on AWS. In fact, between 2015 and 2018, the number of AWS enterprise customers using Windows Server on Amazon EC2 grew by over 400%. This tremendous growth demonstrates the high level of trust AWS has achieved when customers who run business-critical workloads on EC2. So again, that emphasizes the high level of trust our customers have in running these critical workloads on our platform. Today, hundreds of thousands of customers across industries, including Coca-Cola, Adobe, Capital One, General Electric, Riot Games, and Siemens, trust AWS to run business-critical Windows workloads on AWS. So the next slide, we're going to talk about SQL Server 2008 into support. The countdown is certainly on. First of all, with SQL Server into support will be July 9th, 2019, and Windows Server 2008 and 2008 R2 will reach into support on January 14th, 2020. What this means is that no new security updates will be available for these products once they reach into support. And customers running these workloads would be exposed to possible cyber attacks. So it's very important that customers keep these dates in mind if they do require support. Now, to be clear, it's not necessary to move off these products, but again, if you do want to keep receiving these updates, very important to keep your eye on these dates and ensure that you move to a supported product. We know there's a lot of customers out there running these products on AWS. We looked at some of these customers and found that 50 to 60% of on-premises Microsoft workloads are running 2008 versions. So again, there's a lot of customers out there with these older workloads in place. And it's very important that these customers put a plan in place to migrate these workloads to more current versions if they want to continue receiving those support updates. This is especially important for compliance-sensitive customers, such as healthcare's and financial customers, that again are so important around compliance and security. Working with partners like Movere and 6ix9es, you can certainly identify these older products running in your environment and develop a plan for moving those to updated versions. So very important to work with partners to identify these and create a plan for upgrading those to supported versions. All right, so let's look at license included instances first. This is where we're going to talk a little bit about licensing, which is very important for lowering your TCO and making sure that your move to the cloud is the most economical. Some of the advantages of license included include pay-as-you-go pricing. This is ability to pay for resources when you need them and turn them off when no longer required. If you think about the way that it used to be prior to the emergence of the cloud, customers had to have enough licensing and hardware for their busiest day of the year. In today's world, and with the use of the cloud, customers can pay for the resources they need and turn them off when they're no longer required. Think about a retailer during the holiday season. Perfect time for these on-demand resources. Again, using these resources during the busy time and turning them off later in time. There's 3 different ways to purchase license included instances: on-demand, reserved, and spot instances. On-demand is just like it sounds, allows you just to spin up resources with no commitment. Reserved instances allow you to commit to time or money for additional savings, and spot instances allow you to bid on unused capacity in the AWS environment. So making the right decision here can have a drastic effect on your TCO. And working with a partner such as Movere, you can certainly determine the most cost-effective ways to purchase instances. So one of the great things they can help you with, and I know Andrew will talk about that later in the presentation. We also have current legacy versions of Microsoft software available. So we go back quite a few versions. This is very relevant with end of support coming. We do have customers that are running license included versions of software in the 2008 range that will no longer have support. So it's important for these customers to identify those instances and perhaps move up to supported versions. Another benefit of license included is that it can reduce or eliminate enterprise agreements. Many customers are looking to get away from the high level of commitment required under an enterprise agreement, and moving along to license included instances can reduce or remove that burden completely. There's no software upgrade fees. When customers use license included instances, they simply select the version that they like. When a new version comes out, it's available straight away with no additional cost. And finally, AWS is responsible for licensing and compliance. So customers do not need to worry when you use license included instances. Compliance is the responsibility of AWS. Now there's several ways to bring licenses to AWS. The most common one is through license mobility, which means basically bringing licenses to shared tenant EC2 through license mobility and software assurance benefits. There are many products that are eligible for license mobility. SQL Server is the most common, but there are other products, SharePoint, Exchange, Dynamics, System Center, there are several. Customers bringing these licenses to shared tenant EC2 simply complete a verification process with Microsoft, then they deploy these licenses on EC2. For a customer bringing SQL, for example, there would be no charge on AWS for SQL when the customer brings that license to our environment. Now, there are some products that do not have license mobility benefits. These products include Windows Server, Windows Desktop, Microsoft Office, and MSDN. AWS does not recommend that customers bring these licenses to our shared tenant environment. To be clear, customers can deploy their licenses any way they choose, but we certainly do not recommend that customers bring these specific licenses to our shared tenant environment. We do have other options for those, which I'll discuss in a moment, but it would not be compliant to bring these products to our shared tenant environment. Most customers bringing licenses to AWS are bringing SQL Server with the second place of remote desktop services. When customers bring licenses to our default tenant environment, they do bring in their own media and install that on top of the environment. Now, with regard to end of support, customers can bring any version of licenses they wish. It's certainly advisable to bring a supported version. Customers with software assurance, of course, can always upgrade to a more current version. So if a customer, for example, is reading 2008 today and they had active software assurance, they would be eligible to upgrade to a supported version and could work with our partners to achieve that upgrade. Customers without software assurance would be encouraged to maybe look at a license included instance of a more current version that would be supported. We've introduced a feature called Optimized CPU. This came out in the spring. What Optimized CPU does is it allows customers to lower the number of SQL Server cores they bring when they bring licenses through license mobility. So when customers bring licenses through license mobility for SQL, they license by virtual core. They will bring a number of cores equal to the virtual count of the instance. Optimized CPU allows customers to turn hyperthreading off, which basically lowers the number of cores they need to bring when they bring these licenses through license mobility. So in this example, we can see a customer that started out with an 8-core instance and moved along to a 4-core instance through optimized CPU. It's the same instance, it's still an R5 2x large, but they've certainly just lowered the number of cores that instance has access to, which cuts the number of cores they need to bring to AWS in half. So being able to notice or realize when optimized CPU can help you is something that Movere and 6.9s can certainly help our customers evaluate. Also, choosing the right size instance is something that these partners can assist with. It's very important to make sure that you're not running on too large of instance sizes. If you can achieve what you need to achieve with a smaller instance size, it's certainly advisable and will save you money in the long run. Here at AWS, we have different tenant options. The first option is shared tenant or default tenant, which is many different customers sharing the same physical hardware. These environments are multi-tenant. Other terms are cloud, shared tenant, really all referring to the fact that many customers share the same physical hardware. In these environments, AWS determines which host the instances run on, and our customers pay per instance. This is the model that most customers are the most familiar with. We also offer dedicated instances. Dedicated instances are single tenant, meaning that they're one server per customer. This server is dedicated to the use of one account. In these environments, AWS determines which host the instances run on, and customers pay per instance with a $2 an hour regional fee. Dedicated instances are primarily used for the MSDN, customers bringing development licenses. Dedicated instances can move if a customer were to stop and start an instance, but MSDN does not have assignment rules, so we have many customers that bring those licenses to dedicated instances. However, for customers that are concerned with assignment rules or that want to bring Windows Server and other products that don't have software assurance, dedicated hosts are the recommended model. Similar to dedicated instances, dedicated hosts are single tenant and they're dedicated to one AWS account. On a dedicated host, a customer does control placement, so they can ensure that all their licenses and instances are launched from the same host, which allows them to meet those 90-day assignment rules that Microsoft has in place. And finally, customers pay per host at a per hour charge. Now, dedicated hosts, some of the primary benefits is that customers can bring really any Microsoft application, regardless of software assurance or license mobility benefits. The primary use case for dedicated hosts are customers bringing Windows Server. Windows Server is licensed at the physical level, and dedicated hosts give customers the visibility they need to adequately license Windows Server. They also allow a customer, again, to license those products like Windows Data Center and SQL Enterprise at the physical level and get tremendous licensing benefits around virtualization. As you may know, these two products, Windows Data Center and SQL Enterprise, have unlimited virtualization benefits on-prem. On a dedicated host, they have significant virtualization benefits and allow a customer to spin up a great number of instances. We have a website that will demonstrate the number of instances available on each of our hosts. Now, there's no licensing ever included on a dedicated host. A customer brings all their licenses, but again, software assurance is never required. So a customer could really bring any type of license, whether or not they have software assurance on that license. Finally, MSDN is also eligible for dev test and non-production on a dedicated host, although I think most customers do choose dedicated instances for the use of MSDN. So again, with our partners, they can certainly help you evaluate when a dedicated host or a shared tenant environment makes the most sense for both your deployment needs as well as your licensing footprint. Now I'll turn over to Andrew Ireland to talk about assessments with Movere.
Okay, thanks, Lance. So this is Andrew Ireland from Movere. I'm the Chief Evangelist. I'm also the founder of Movere. and I'm the co-creator of the Movere platform. So let's jump into SQL end of support. But before we do, let's just give a quick overview of Movere. It's not a product that was just simply cobbled together from some scripts or an appliance that you can place in a virtualized environment. Movere has actually been developed over the course of 20 years that we've been providing consulting engagements to enterprise-grade customers. Now, when I talk about enterprise-grade customers, I'm not talking about one domain, 20 servers. I'm talking about customers with many domains, many servers. And even though the platform can be used for very small environments, 10, 20 servers, it really lights up when we hit the enterprise space. The reason for that is because Movere has actually been crafted to that space. So we don't leverage an approach that constrains us in terms of we use WMI that might flood a network or spike CPU or memory consumption on a device. We're built for the enterprise. We leverage dissolvable bots that do not create an attack surface, and it gives us the ability to update our platform constantly to bring new features that customers need. Now, to give some high-level metrics and sort of the environments that Movere is running, we've actually scanned a customer with 491 domains. The second behind that was about 440 domains. So these environments do exist out there. The problem that creates is when you're moving to the cloud, you need to understand the entire footprint. So that is why we put such a high focus on completeness, making sure everything's been identified, and then dependencies and so forth. In terms of largest environments we've scanned, one customer actually had a little bit over 300,000 servers. We're talking about 1.4 million workstations. This was a very large customer, but it really highlights the fact that when you start dealing in these magnitudes in the enterprise space, you just can't make it work on a spreadsheet. It's impossible. And that's not even addressing not only the initial capture of the entire environment, but keeping the data updating fresh and dynamic. The other thing I'll point out too is it's about 105,000 unique price points queried daily. So Movere brings in all the pricing daily, and it updates not only the pricing for like our default region, which is North Virginia, but it updates it for everything across all the different commit levels. There's 13 in shared tenant. There's about 3 or 4 in dedicated host. And it updates the pricing based on region. So where you place the servers around the world, Movere will update the pricing. Movere even updates sizing based on region. At the bottom of the screen there, you see some of the customers we've worked with AWS. As you can see, they're not exactly mom and pop shops. These are big organizations with complex cloud migration problems. And over to the right there, we talk about 99.7% accuracy. This is all about standard deviation. You cannot size for the cloud based on a peak in CPU or a peak in memory or assigned resources. Movere is actually leveraging standard deviation, which means the more observations you submit, the more accurate the sizings get. Okay, so that's just a quick overview of Movere. It's not something that was built yesterday. We've actually been developing it for 20 years. The engine itself has been in place for about 10 years. Now, in terms of SQL is sensitive for many reasons. The primary one is it's housing sensitive data. All the front-end applications, all of that, all of your load balances, all these things are necessary parts of the stack. But at the end of the day, everybody talks about the data. And so the data, one of the main repositories of data is SQL. And depending on the industry you're working with, there may be all sorts of security restrictions. We might be in pharmaceutical, where a customer might say, I just can't have you looking at my SQL servers. We might be in banking, where there's concerns about spiking CPU on a server and causing an outage, which means that a transaction committed in New York is not replicating over to Seattle, or something of that nature. So Movere was built to get the job done. And so what I mean by that is a customer should not have to change their environment, but because we're dealing with SQL, we can actually get a lot of the SQL data points from the Windows layer. A lot of SQL is actually surfaced up through what's called the Common Information Model. Movere queries that by default. So even if a customer says, we're pharmaceutical, I can't have you connecting to these SQL instances, it's not a problem. Movere can still serve as version, addition, service pack, if it's covered by support, etc. Service pack is also another thing that's actually worth pointing out. It is SQL 2008 that is coming to end of support next year, But support is actually driven down to the service pack level, and that is why we capture that as part of a Movere scan. Other things that we capture as well is, as Lance mentioned, CPU optimization. Movere is not only collecting CPU usage, it's collecting it all the way down to the database level. So a lot of customers will initially look at their environment, see SQL servers that don't even have any databases running on them. Well, that's probably a red flag. It's probably just a migration that occurred years ago, and it was never powered down, shut off, uninstalled. In addition to that, it could be a high availability configuration. It doesn't have databases for a reason. It might just be a witness server. You don't know. So Movere is capturing high availability configurations, service packs, versions, editions, and the only edition you actually can't get from the Windows layer for SQL is actually SQL 2000. But the nice part is the system account on Windows can actually access SQL, and Microsoft didn't actually take that out until SQL 2012. So Movere is going to find every version and edition of SQL that's out there. Okay, so if we move on, this is just a quick overview of sort of what you can get out of Movere. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Movere is capturing CPU utilization down to the database level. So many customers might look at a SQL Server and go, I don't know if we use it. We go down to the database level, and the only database that's non-system on that server is consuming like 0.1% of CPU, which is the first step to identifying things that probably aren't being used. The second step is application dependencies, which Movere captures by default. They come through the network layer. They're unauthenticated. Okay, so when you connect to a Windows or Linux device, the connection comes in, you see that process or thread being connected to. When we get into SQL, it's a whole different transaction. It could be a service account that's connecting to SQL. It could be a user who's connecting. Because it's an authenticated connection, Movere is not only going to tell you who's connecting, it's going to tell you what database they're connecting to. So it's not just they're connecting to SQL, it goes all the way down to the database level, and it's even going to tell you the technology they're using to connect. So again, really good data points that can be used to identify what is and isn't being used, what's placing load on the system, what's not. And again, we're big advocates, just like AWS and 6.9s, of why migrate and then worry about if you're using it or not and then pair it off. Why not just migrate what's actually running your business? Okay, so that's why all these dependencies. The one thing I'll finish on that slide, on the previous slide, was some customers ask me, well, what if I don't want all this data for security reasons? We have government contracts, whatever it may be. All of this can actually be turned off in Movere as well, which is nice. All of this can be toggled. So if you don't want it down to the database level, turn it off. Now, in terms of cloud sizing, a lot of people that I've worked with in my career look at the cloud and say, oh, it's easy. It's a resource equivalency match. You've got 2 cores on-prem, you've got 4 gig of RAM. Oh, well, let's go and stick it in an M5 large or whatever we want to pick. It doesn't work that way. The reason is because when we're on-prem, we assign resources, but we don't wake up in the morning and go, well, you know what, I'll limit that server that I created to 1,000 IOPS, or I'll limit it to 300 meg of throughput. We don't do that. We buy a storage solution, we build VMs, we attach them, we optimize them to get the best they can out of the storage, but we don't throttle our machines. That would be silly. It's a sunk cost. We own the resource. Whether we use it or not is our decision. Problem is, when you move to the cloud, you need to factor in all these pillars, and that's what Movere is doing. It's collecting what we refer to as actual resource consumption data, or ARC data, and the ARC data is actually looking across all the key pillars. It's not only capturing application dependencies down to the Windows and Linux layer, but also into SQL. It's also capturing CPU utilization. It's capturing network throughput, IOPS, storage needs, etc. It's capturing it all. And what it does is it basically slides across these pillars. Now, what inevitably happens, and this is what Lance was referring to in terms of CPU optimization, what inevitably happens is CPU is the pillar that gets significantly over provisioned. So we might be looking at a SQL reporting server and it's driving lots of throughput for obvious reasons. We might look at a SQL updating server and it's driving lots of IOPS, but throughput is literally 0. So what's happening is these cloud sizings are being pushed up the ladder in terms of an optimal sizing, and what often gets left behind is CPU utilization. So I often see servers, like a server that's being used might, and we can use like horsepower as an equivalency. We might see SQL servers being provisioned with 400 horsepower, they're using like 80 horsepower. So why go and buy a 400 horsepower server if I only need 80? And this is where AWS really lights up. The CPU optimization options are off the chart. You can optimize anything. You can make it hyper-threaded, single-threaded. You can do whatever you want. And for a SQL admin, that's music to their ears. Okay, so Movere gives you all these data points. Now, to give an example of what I mean, this is an actual customer that you're looking at. And so out of the box, Movere actually does calculate SQL licensing requirements. And it's not just a simple, oh, it's 4 core, therefore it's 4 licenses. No. Movere gives you the ability to license at the host level. So a lot of enterprise customers have signed up for host level licensing of SQL, which is great. I mean, there are lots of opportunities there. But the problem that creates is that customers then default to installing everything as Enterprise Edition, because why? We're licensed at the host. I can run any edition I want. Therefore, why not run Enterprise? They also over provision. Why would I give everything 2 cores when there's no incremental cost to giving everything 16 cores? So we go to organizations, they've had a host level licensing strategy, they're being a cloud migration partner in, they look at what they've currently provisioned, and if you've given something 16 or 24 cores, the partner might assume then that's what it needs in the cloud. It's nothing to do with that. It's totally related to their legacy licensing strategy. So whether you're licensing at the guest level, at the host level, whether you're actually needing software assurance for migration, Movere calculates all of that. Even down to the point of if the machine moved while powered off, that is not a migration in accordance with the product use rights. Movere even factors in powered on and powered off events. That is how we land at this licensing count. This is not just a guess or an estimate. It also factors in things like AMD chip step-ups. It also features the minimum 4-core step-up. So if you've got a whole lot of 2-core machines in your environment, Movere will step them up. More importantly, we actually calculate how many cores you need in the cloud. These are not made-up numbers. These are actually real numbers, and we see it on every customer. Now, a lot of times you might say, well, that's not the price I pay, or because I've got a host-level licensing strategy, I don't need that many licenses. No, that's already factored in. And you might say, well, we get a big discount. That's not the pricing we pay. Forget that. Forget the pricing. Okay. Yes, this customer was looking at about a $700,000 saving. The real issue is, what does it equate to in compute hours? So when we look at an MBox and we might say that is 70 cents an hour for one server, what does it translate in terms of SQL? So just as a rough rule of thumb, 4 SQL standard cores, 48 cents, 4 SQL enterprise cores are $1.50. So if I can take that many cores out of your environment, what am I basically doing? I'm redirecting money that you're spending on SQL unnecessarily, because it is unnecessary. These are cores that are not needed for your performance, and I'm rediverting that to where you actually need to spend the money, which is compute. And that's what this all boils down to. I'm not actually like trying to say, oh, the cloud's super cheap, go there, or even just trying to do a TCO. I'm simply saying, let's redivert spend to where it's needed as opposed to where it's been assigned historically. Okay, and that, again, to put that in perspective, this customer is looking at about a $53 an hour saving. How many 70-cent servers can you get into that? A lot. And again, and that's a 70-cent server, which is actually quite a decent server. It's not like your low end, which runs at 6, 10, 12 cents, etc. Now, to put optimization in perspective, again, these are real numbers. Movere actually sizes on 2 key views. One is what we refer to as a provision view. It's a really important distinction here. And what we're saying is, if we just simply lifted and shifted your environment based upon the resources it's been assigned, and I'm not just talking 2 cores and 4 gig of memory. Yes, memory is kind of a static view. We can talk about NVMe and all things like that. But let's talk about compute. Compute, it's not just a 2-core. Movere is looking at the chip that you're running on-prem, taking a single-threaded compute capacity of it and multiplying it into the number of resources that's been assigned to the guest to calculate the single-threaded compute equivalency. We then benchmark that into all the sizes that are offered in the cloud. And what we're saying is, if we wanted to enjoy the same amount of resource assignment that you've done on-prem, so you know how many times you've spun up a server and you've said, oh, well, yeah, 4 cores, 8 gig of RAM, let's go with it. That is what Movere is doing here. And we're saying that to achieve that sort of let's just spin it up using templates, it's about 5.5 million. Now let's actually size it based upon what is driving the performance on that machine. Now, obviously, Movere can tell you it's the NIC count. Seriously, the NIC count that's driving this sizing, or it's the throughput, or it's the memory, or it's the CPU. Movere can do all of that. But the important thing is, this is what we see. The average customer, and we've got about 150 billion data points in our warehouse, the average customer comes in at about 43 cents on the dollar. So if you're spending $1,000 here, optimized, it'll be about $430 in AWS. That's the difference it makes. Now, I will point out here, this includes compute only. So because we're talking about CPU optimization, we're talking about SQL BYOL. but it's important to bear that in mind. The SQL goes on top of this on an optimized count, okay? Now, finally, I'll talk about a white paper I've written recently. It is available, so just go to that link. You can download it. I talk all about how it's actually how the end of SQL is impacting enterprises. The key takeaway on this document is it's not. A lot of people think, well, it's Windows, it's SQL. I can get online, do an internet search, and somebody's probably run into that error before. I can fix it. That's not really the issue. Where most customers run afoul of Microsoft support timeframes is that other vendors tie their product support to Microsoft's. So you get on the phone, you've been paying for support for several years. The first question they'll ask is, what version of SQL you're running on? Well, it's on an 05. Sorry, your support is invalidated. We are tied to Microsoft support dates. And I've had a lot of customers who say to me, it breaks my heart because we just can't now pivot and update SQL. So the end of support is not just a Microsoft thing. It does affect other vendors, so it's worth taking that into consideration. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to transition over to Eric. And now that you know all these things, Eric is going to walk you through how 6nines turns all of this information, and it's a ton, it's a mountain of information. He's going to walk you through how he takes this information and turns this into not only a migration plan, but an actual migration. This is where the rubber hits the road. So thanks for your time.
Thank you, Andrew. Hi, I'm Eric Terrell, Managing Director at 6nines. I'm here to talk about how we take that information that Lance and Andrew have given us so far and help our customers plan for that. So just real quickly on 6nines. We're one of the first Amazon Partner Network consulting partners. Been in this business pushing 10 years, 100% focused on AWS. And we have deep knowledge of Microsoft workloads and best practices, and we bring those to bear for our customers to help them take all of the information and capabilities that AWS has and use tools like Movere to plan for their migrations, automate environments, etc. We help organizations benefit from the flexibility that AWS provides across many different Microsoft workloads. Today we're talking about SQL Server end of life, end of support, but Windows Server, Active Directory, Exchange, SharePoint, lots of things go along with that. And when we're talking to enterprises, typically there's not just one thing they're trying to migrate. They're looking to possibly get out of a data center in a short time frame or over a period of time, and they need to plan for that. So there's application dependencies, there's other things that come into play there. One of the key things that we promote with our customers is agility and security. And so we take this into account from an architecture and design perspective and, throughout deployment and support on our Microsoft solutions on AWS. When we're looking at this plan, there's several different routes that can be taken for a typical migration. SQL Server 2008 options are going to be a little bit more limited in a couple of areas due to the end of support. So we're not going to be looking to rehost or just pick up these 2008 databases and move them over to AWS. That would be an option for general migrations. But in this case, we need to, make a change in that environment. So we're going to be looking at, re-platforming, determining that platform. So, what version of SQL Server we want to run, what the underlying infrastructure is. So taking into account the data that Movere has collected and looking at, how the infrastructure, the servers, the VMs need to change for that, taking into account what Lance talked about with shared instances versus dedicated instances and dedicated hosts. There also are options on repurchasing, making different decisions around what type of software you're buying, refactoring, looking at a different way to architect your application, your data architecture, et cetera. Again, retaining is not on the table in this environment due to the same reason as the rehosting. We need to move off of this platform and not take on additional technical debt and risk by continuing to run unsupported platforms. In some cases, As Andrew mentioned, there may be old servers out there that are just kind of sitting there, not doing a whole lot. In that case, we would retire those servers. And so those would be our solution alternatives for migrating the SQL Server environments to AWS. So how do we make these decisions? Again, we've collected a lot of data already during the assessment phase, but as we're planning this out, we need to look at how critical applications and databases are. What is their importance to the business? What is their priority? There are always varying priorities in a business. You can look at internal facing applications, customer facing applications, mission critical applications to say transaction throughput. We would also look at the complexity and risk of the migration. So typically we look at this in terms of effort and time. The amount of effort required to do a lift and shift of resources, again, is not one of the capabilities we have or one of the opportunities we have for the SQL Server migration. So we have to look at effort for other things, some of those transformation things, some of those rehosting types of capabilities. Again, we're looking at time as well. Most of these environments can be transformed very quickly, and that's one of the great benefits of AWS in terms of the agility of it and the ability to get and procure servers and services when you need them. We've talked about costs a lot. Obviously, Andrew and Lance talked about ways to manage costs and explore opportunities for cost savings. This is always a critical component of our migration planning. And as we've discussed prior in this webinar, that's being taken into account, and that will be solidified as part of the planning phase. And finally, feasibility. Can what we're trying to do support the business? That's always the most important aspect of any of these decisions we make. And you see that in a couple areas here. The importance to the business and how we're supporting the business is always very critical. So we take these into account as we're making these decisions. Some of the other considerations we have are on the architecture side. From an application modernization perspective, we're looking at possibly scaling out resources when necessary. I like to say that data has gravity, so scale out may not always be an option from a SQL Server perspective or from a database perspective in general. But typically, again, these databases are supporting applications, both small and large. And if you're supporting a retail operation, your database is going to need to support scale out of resources and connections from lots of different resources. So when we look at this, scale out is very important. I always try to emphasize avoiding shared state as much as possible. Some cases you will store that state in a database. A very common pattern in AWS is to store that in DynamoDB, which is a data platform. So that's an architecture consideration. Dynamo is an example of myriad services and applications that can support your architecture considerations as you're looking to scale out and modernize your application. As Andrew talked about, right sizing and scaling up and scaling down is needed. There are a variety of options here. Getting this right from day one is very important to save on cost and make sure your workload is supported properly and is running properly. What we commonly see is that our customers moving to AWS are able to downsize and right size their environments to support their application. In most cases, even finding better performance on a lower scaled server in AWS versus whatever they were running in their on-premises environment. Another consideration is to leverage caching layers in the environment, read heavy querying, things like that. From a performance perspective, these come into play. So when you're planning your AWS architecture and your transformation on SQL Server, that's another thing to keep in mind from an architecture perspective. So which migration strategy is right for you? Again, we're taking into account the business drivers. We're looking at a couple different strategies. and those have benefits and trade-offs. So if we're looking at familiarity, full control, reliability, really limiting the change in the environment, one of those strategies is to rehost SQL Server on Amazon EC2. This is a very common strategy. However, keeping in mind that we're on end of support here. When we're rehosting, we're likely also moving to a newer version, a supported version of SQL Server on EC2. So this is an option. Just keep that in mind. The benefits of this are a familiar administration experience. Your admins and users are going to not see much change, if any, in the new environment. They'll be able to administer the databases and servers pretty similarly to how they do today. They'll be able to have full control over the environment, and this is something that's sometimes a misnomer or misperception in cloud, is that you don't have as much control as you would have in the data center. From a software-defined infrastructure perspective, you have amazing amount of control in AWS, both over your servers and the underlying infrastructure, the network, the storage, and into PaaS services, and that extends into security, that extends into reliability, performance, etc. Another benefit of that is all your SQL Server features are available to you as they were before. If your business driver is focusing on the business, maybe lack of some of the underlying expertise that you would have, or maybe you're looking to take resources and move resources to the business focus, you may want to re-platform SQL Server on Amazon RDS. Amazon RDS is the relational database service. It is supported in a variety of SQL Server options. It provides an optimized architecture. It also takes care of patching and backups. So these things are configurable in terms of the backup strategy you choose. And you can also configure for high availability in these environments. So great service. We see lots of customers using and running SQL Server on Amazon RDS. It's a wonderful solution for our customers, and they're very happy with that. If your business driver is to modernize and maybe look at cost savings or have open source options, this gets into the refactor strategy. So as a customer, you would be looking to adopt cloud native services. This isn't necessarily the right strategy for every customer, but in some cases, those customers find different capabilities of platform as a service capabilities of Aurora, DynamoDB, Redshift, or Neptune fit their needs a little bit better. To give you an example of that, we see a lot of customers running Microsoft SQL Server as their data warehouse, and moving that data warehouse to something like Redshift. We're seeing lots of query performance gains, as well as abilities to manage their data warehouse and data marts in a much different way. But again, these different data architectures and the availability of them, and the fact that they're managed as a service, really brings ease of management, ease of integration with the existing cloud ecosystem, and significantly reduces the total cost of ownership, limiting the licensing needs. No licensing on these. You're really paying for the service and the storage and compute. There also are migration tooling and services in order to handle this. One of them would be the database migration service. So there are tools in place to help customers plan the migration and execute the migration. So these are great tools. We see these working with lots of customers where they're, again, to take an example, SQL Server, data warehouse to Redshift. There are schema tools available to give an understanding of how that migration would take place. There are ongoing replication capabilities if you are going to replicate from one database to another, or one database to a different data architecture. So these are, great tools, great benefits. Again, it's not a one size fits all. There are multiple different strategies that our customers take advantage of. We see success across all of these. So there's not just one right answer to this, but these are some of the strategies that you would take into account as you're planning. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jim Burnham. He's going to talk to you a little bit about the SQL Server 2008 assessment and workshop.
Thank you very much, Eric. Really appreciate you uncovering all the different ways that SQL Server 2008 workloads can be migrated to the cloud. So hopefully we've done a good job today about exposing you to 3 critical issues involved in assessing your SQL Server 2008 risk and those options that are available to you. Lance did a great job of talking about the cloud and Microsoft licensing and letting, hopefully reassuring you that whatever your licensing posture is, there is a way to use the cloud to lower your SQL Server costs and licensing, and that you do have options there to take advantage of all the capabilities of the cloud to lower your total cost. Lance is a great resource for that. Amazon's a great resource for that. Hopefully you have no concerns about using your Microsoft licenses inside of Amazon or whatever cloud that you're looking at, but that should be off the table as a concern. Secondly, Andrew did a great job of talking about how Movere can find all your SQL Server 2008 instances and then roll them all up so you have an enterprise view of what's actually going on inside of your enterprise from a resource consumption as well as in assigned licenses. There's great opportunities inside of there to do cost optimization just on underused instances. So if you do anything at all, you may want to consider the SQL Server 2008 workshop and trial just to find out what's going on inside of your environment and get an inventory. And then finally, Eric did a good job of talking about all the different ways that you can migrate SQL Server workloads to Amazon and the different capabilities that are present for you. So the real question is how can we take the opportunity to expose these resources to you so that you have the ability to use them in your environment. We're offering a SQL Server 2008 end of support assessment and workshop. The whole idea is to take all this expertise that you've heard today and be able to apply it and focus it on your own situation. So it includes a 30-day use of the Movere license, which 6.9s would set up and run inside of your environment. You get that entire inventory of all of the SQL Server 2008 instances and hardware that's in your environment, and you get to keep that. That's for you. You can do whatever you want with it. In terms of the workshop, we would then use that Movere inventory then to walk through your environment, help you decide what applications you can retire, what applications you need to migrate on-prem to a supported version of SQL, and then looking at your total cost and resource and license consumption, decide if and when it makes sense for you to migrate those workloads to Amazon in the cloud. So the whole idea here is to give you the opportunity to take this event of SQL Server 2008 and then make some really informed choices about how to optimize your environment, either from a cost perspective, from a performance perspective, or just a resource utilization perspective. This is a complimentary workshop. There should be hopefully you see a lot of the business value in here. The only commitment it takes from you is the ability to run the tool in your environment and your commitment to the half-day workshop. And just to emphasize about the workshop, and that it's really takes the point of view of being a customer-centric, and it's not about selling you on one cloud or another cloud or about trying to get you to do something. We really want this to be an opportunity to provide you with the information about your environment so that you can make informed choices about what makes sense for you going forward. So if you think the workshop would be helpful for you to work through your SQL Server 2008 issues, you can sign up today at info.69sit.com/SQL 2008. There's an online form up there. You can fill that out. The information will come to me, Jim Burnham, or to one of the folks on our inside team. And we'd be more than happy to reach out to you and talk about your unique needs, if a workshop is right for you, and if so, how we can get started. So the number one thing I would recommend is start your planning today, whether it's with 6.9s or Movere or AWS or anyone else. Start your planning. We'd be more than happy to support you in your efforts going forward. And finally, with that, I'd like to thank our presenters today. Thank you very much, Lance from Amazon Web Services, Andrew from Movere, and Eric from 6.9s. Have a great day.